Recording. Okay. Welcome, everybody. I am delighted to welcome you to, hello, Karen. I am delighted to welcome you to week 5. What am I doing wrong? Why am I seeing everybody? Hello, Julia, except for my...
Hello.
All right, can you still see my PowerPoint or no? No, okay, something, can you see it now?
No.
Okay, something's gone wrong. How about now?
Now I can see it.
Excellent. All right, welcome to week 5, everybody. I hope you're doing okay. Like I say, it's kind of miserable here, but c'est la vie. All right, so good job on your homework last week. It was a little more it's the first week where it's a little more challenging. So I did want to raise a couple of points vowels. You know, vowels are the thing. Vowels are what drive people completely crazy because they're so tough to you know, they can be tough to put your finger on, but they're also, unfortunately, probably the most critical thing we've got going on. If you've got somebody with a vowel system that's completely off with fairies, then they're going to be completely unintelligible. So it is something that we want to spend some time with, and we'll spend more time with it. So a couple of points that came up from the homework. Recognizing the importance of stressed and unstressed vowels is very important, and pulling that away from the orthography. So in the campus example, most of you got this, but the idea was that the second one should be reduced to the schwa, right? Because it was the unstressed syllable. So one thing that you want to do with your students is talk to them about stressed and unstressed syllables, and the fact that what happens is it goes down into a schwa. Yes, they're being confused by the orthography, but you want to keep it with the phonology. Yeah, so that's the second point. Try and keep it to the phonological, not the orthographic. So, for example, I know that in education, there's terminology, for example, reduced versions of vowels, meaning the short E versus the long E and so on, but that's, none of that applies to terminology and phonology. So short or lax vowels are not reduced versions of vowels. Okay, we only talk about vowel reduction when we mean unstressed vowels. So use of the schwa, for example, or syncope effects, like where an entire vowel or syllable disappears. So keep vowel reduction just for that term. Of course, there are connections, a lot of them, between orthography and phonology, and we are going to look at those. There's a whole chapter in your book on those, and we will look. But orthography is not a good way to describe phonology. Phonology should be described as phonology, not via orthography, because that can cause some confusion. Also, there was an interesting Emily, one of your colleagues in this class, just emailed me last week to tell me about one of the students that she's tutoring, who's actually illiterate in her first language from Afghanistan. So she's completely illiterate. So at that point, you realize that you're really working with the phonology. You can't make any kind of assumptions about the orthography. All right, stop me if you've got any questions. What happens now is we do a little jump. We're going to jump past 2 chapters of your current book, because we're going to come back to that in the second half of the semester, right? So we are done, well, we will be soon. We're going to carry on going, particularly with the vowels, but also with the consonants a little bit in this book that you've got right now. And then we're going to come back to all of this, tonic syllables, tone units, pitch, prominence, pauses, all of that in the second half of the semester, okay? All right, so we skipped a couple of chapters, and you're now, I smudged these two chapters together because really 9, 8 we're going to spend our time on today, and 9 is a sort of dip in, dip out chapter. 9 gives you a lot of different techniques of how to teach things, so everything from online stuff to drama techniques to all kinds of things. So it's one thing that you want to sort of look at yourself, to look at different techniques, but there isn't really a great deal to you know, to explain with that. So the materials today are your PowerPoint, then there's 2 PDFs which you're going to use for your reading post and your activity, and then the I've got the information for those 2 things. So chapter 8 is on testing. Testing and evaluation are always interesting because each of you are going to have your own experiences, both as learners but also as teachers. Because of your teaching context, each of you will probably have wildly different, you know, options in terms of whether you're allowed to do any official testing, or it's encouraged, or the test that you have to use, and so on. So there are a number of formal, what we would call summative oral tests. So there's a difference between formative testing, which is to try and see where your students are at in terms of diagnosis, and then summative testing, which basically says, okay, I'm now going to test your knowledge and give you a score. So there are a number of formal summative oral tests, which you'll know, the IBT, the IELTS, the ACTFL, that you guys may be using in your schools. There's a whole list of those on Appendix 17. We'll discuss anything that you want to about those, but I'm not going to go through that list. Some of you will be more or less familiar with the different ones. And as I say, you probably have very little choice in many of your contexts about what you're allowed to do. So what we'll focus on here instead is initial diagnostic testing. So the testing that you can do inside your classroom when you have a speaking class or a pronunciation class. You can do your own initial diagnostic testing as to where your students are and how you might want to focus your curriculum. So as we've discussed before, current debates in the field of pronunciation are context-based intelligibility models, not nativism. So in other words, decision-making, it's more difficult. You might, but it's more difficult to justify making decisions based on nativism if you've got limited amount of time to work with your students. You really want to be looking at curricular choices that are based on intelligibility. So context-driven intelligibility means where are your students planning on using their language, right? So what are the different language use situations? Are they ESL, EFL, ELF, English as a lingua franca? Obviously all that's going to drive different kinds of decisions in terms of what your students might want. And you also have to identify what you do have control over and what you don't. So as I say, that will vary wildly between your schools. Some of you may not even have an option to teach pronunciation, so you have to sort of work it in around a corner. So whereas others of you may have, you know, an hour-long class dedicated to speaking and pronunciation. This is different from saying that you can't choose your textbook. I understand that a lot of you can't choose your textbooks, but you can always supplement a textbook. Even if you hate your textbook, you can always add supplemental material that will do it. But if you're being driven by an exam-based curriculum, that's a different thing. You you know, you might not be able to spend as much time as you want on any given thing. So assuming for most of you, this is not always true, and I'll ask you when we're done with this section what your particular contexts are, but it's unlikely that you'll be, actually, why don't I just ask you now? How many of you do, if any of you, just unmute yourselves and let me know, have the luxury of a full semester in which you get to teach your students just pronunciation or pronunciation and speaking? You can unmute and tell me. Liliana's saying no, she doesn't. Anybody else? No. Eri says no, and Anne says no. Caroline, do you get a chance to teach just pronunciation? No? Okay, so basically everyone's saying no, which is as much as I suspected. So how do you scale down in that case to sort of slide in what pronunciation you can? Again, remember there are a number of segmentals that don't usually affect intelligibility. They are usually consonants, but also the schwa. Again, we come back to the California example that he's completely is intelligible. He doesn't use the schwa, but that's okay. Now, obviously, if you don't use the schwa and you've got a stress problem, which is what was happening in the example they gave you of campus, there was a double problem. There was both syllables were equally stressed, and that's why you got that full vowel. So as long as Arnie says California, right, so the primary stress on the word is correct, the lack of the schwa in California is not going to cause the intelligibility problem. So there are two different issues that you want to think about there. There are others that we've looked at and that your book lists as high functional load issues that you do want to try and spend some time with. Vowels are critical, as I keep saying. A good foundation in the basic vowel chart is something that you should offer your students. That is really something that they need to grasp as well as possible. And we know from research that word stress is also, so this idea of making sure that you have one primary word stress and it's on the right one. So again, I'll come back to my example that's the clearest. Instead of hypothesis, my student would say hypothesis. And you can see that if you didn't realize it was hypothesis, it would be completely impossible to work out what it was that she was trying to say. So also, depending upon your population, you might have immediate problems to address. So for example, if you've got a high Vietnamese population or Thai population, as we've talked about before, you might have really serious intelligibility problems because they're missing onsets and codas from their syllables. So that obviously is an immediate issue that you want to take care of. Okay. So a couple of important things to remember that we say every week. Perception and production should both be addressed in your diagnostic testing. You can't choose to do just one or just the other. You need to be working on both of those skills. An additional thing when it comes to pronunciation assessment is getting a sense of their performance anxiety. So performance anxiety for pronunciation is a very real issue that comes with spoken discourse that doesn't come in the same way with writing. It comes, for example, with writing if you're doing an exam and you've got a very limited amount of time in which to write. But if you're just writing and it's under your own time and your own steam, then you're okay. Oh, here comes this is my cat, Lily. Say hi, Lily. Yeah, sorry. And so But performance anxiety for speaking is a real problem. And in fact, when I was learning Hungarian and when I lived in Hungary, I had a real performance anxiety problem. I really didn't want to talk to people. I felt my Hungarian wasn't good enough, and I'm not sure if I already told you the story of that. So research shows that if you have one drink, you shouldn't get completely loaded. But if you have like one beer or one glass of wine or one like shot, then some of that performance anxiety goes away. So your pronunciation can get a lot better in your second language. I kid you not, this is actually research done on this that suggests this true. And it is indeed true that my best experience, and I remember it really well, was I went to a party and I spoke like intermediate Hungarian smoothly, and you know, after my couple of glasses of wine, of course that goes, if you go too far, then it goes downhill in the other direction. So I'm not suggesting that we all go and get completely plastered in order to speak our second language, or that you suggest to your learners that they should do that. But anyway, so part of your needs assessment is really trying to find out how your student feels about speaking in a second language. Do they feel confident or do they not feel confident? As well as motivations and goals. So let's look at that, how that pans out. So that gives us overall 3 areas that you're looking at. So production of consonants, vowels, linking stress and suprasegmentals, perception of the same things, and then a needs analysis of personal goals and motivations and affective issues. So how they feel personally about speaking in the second language or interacting, you know, with native speakers. So I'm going to give you a few examples, but chapter 8, as you'll know if you've looked at it already, gives you tons of examples. I'm going to give you a few others. This one is a very traditional example of a production of consonants, and it's a very strange text. It's called Please Call Stella, and it's a strange text because it includes every consonant and every consonant cluster that your learners will have to deal with. So please call Stella, ask her to bring these things with her from the store: 6 spoons of fresh snow peas, 5 thick slabs of blue cheese, and maybe a snack for her brother Bob. We also need a small plastic snake and a big toy frog for the kids. She can scoop these things into 3 red bags, and we will go meet her Wednesday at the train station. So that strange paragraph gives you every consonant cluster that's possible and every consonant that's possible. So if you want to practice with, you know, if you want to do a needs assessment with your students, that's one short thing that you can have them record for you, and then you can take the MP4 and have a listen. So that's consonants and consonant clusters. You have a couple of production examples for vowels in your book. This I just sort of scanned this and it didn't come out very well, but this is on page 328 of your book, and this covers every vowel. So, and it's it specifically tells you what. So living in California, we face a constant threat. So these are all the vowels that they would have to produce as well. So that's another. So this is a very standard thing to have your students do a read aloud passage, okay? But clearly there's a difference between reading aloud and spontaneous talk. So if you're going to do a full needs assessment, you should include both. So you should have your students do something like a couple of reading passages, and I'm going to show you a couple more too, and then also have them do a spontaneous speak. So you can say to them, one of the interesting ones that dialectologists often use is, tell me about the scariest or most frightening experience of your life, you know, because the idea is that if the learner gets engaged emotionally in the discussion, in the description to you of the story or whatever, that they will stop the focus so hard on thinking about the pronunciation and start trying to communicate with you the feelings. So then you get a better sense of what the spontaneous speech is like. So the idea is you really try and do a bit of both. Here's another very popular one for both segments and both segmentals and super segmentals. By super segmentals here, they mean a focus on grammatical based intonation. So specifically, can you say question, can you use question intonation? So have you observed the ways that people from different cultures use silence? Have you noticed that some people interrupt conversations more than other people? All cultures don't have the same rules governing these areas, etc., etc., right? There's another one here. Should you wait until someone has finished a sentence before contributing to a discussion, or can you break into the middle of someone's sentence? Okay, so all these are designed to give you a sense of whether they can do this kind of intonation over a period of time. So that's some production examples. Then there's some perception examples. I'm just giving you a couple here, but there's tons in your book. Again, these are not in your book. This Please Call Stella is not in your book. So if you want to use Please Call Stella, then you can, this is the passage that you can use. I can't remember if this is in your book or not, but there's other ones in your book that are paragraph long. This one isn't in your book, but you've got similar ones in your book. This one is a perception of past endings. So essentially you create a file. I don't have the sound file that this was created from, but you create a sound file and then you have them say, so let's say in which a nuclear, so in designing advertisements, advertisers can link stimuli. They try to create a certain kind of learning in which a neutral stimulus is, I don't know, a neutral stimulus is changed to a or whatever. So then in number one, they have to say whether the changed is T ending, D ending, or id ending, right? So they have to circle which one it is. So this is, as I say, I don't have this particular sound file. You can make it up for yourself. You can do these, you can also do it with, obviously with plural, with S, Z, with S, Z, or Z. So that's one. Then, okay, so I didn't really have many examples. I didn't put loads of examples of this because I realized that there's tons of examples in the book. So if you really want to look at the different ideas of perception, vowel perception, consonant perception, you're just looking for these different kinds of tests. The final one is, we said, the third and final part of a needs assessment is looking at personal goals and conversations. This is not in your book. This is one that I've had for a very long time, which is why I scanned it and it's gone a bit off. But basically, you have oral communication needs assessment. So you have the name, the person fills out their name, and then you say, how important is this skill to your work or your studies? What is your current ability in this area? And you get their idea. So we've got here participating in informal conversations, participating in discussions, giving short presentations, giving long presentations, using appropriate stress, speaking clearly, etc., etc. So that's a way for you to get a sense of how they're feeling, one way for you to get a sense of how they're feeling about themselves. You can also, if you only have a few students, do affective factor interviews where you literally sit with them and say, you know, tell me what you think your easiest speaking situation is, what's the most difficult, Where do you feel that you're being misunderstood the most? What area would you like to improve? You can also do that using a much larger, sort of questionnaire type format. Describe a situation in which you feel native speakers misunderstood you. Is there a particular situation that makes you anxious, comfortable, and so on? So that, between those three things, is covering the overall areas and then sub areas that you want to have as part of your diagnostic. So where possible, smiley face, where possible means I know that some of you might be teaching, 70 Chinese students all at once in a great big class, in which case this isn't, individual diagnostics is probably not possible. But for those of you that are teaching in much smaller environments or are teaching a few students at a time, maintaining these individual diagnostics should be something that you're doing for your students in terms of their speaking skills. And you should be periodically returning to them throughout the semester and individualizing your activities and feedback as much as possible based on those diagnostics. You should have a pre-course and a post-course diagnostic. So have the students fill out a final diagnostic at the end in terms of production, perception, and affective factors, so you can track the changes. So you can have them do the same passages right at the beginning of a semester and right at the end, or right at the beginning of a 3-month tuition course and right at the end. And you should also be ready to provide a final summary for each of your students, again, assuming it's possible, in which you give sort of a candid assessment of their improvements and any continuing, issues. So you don't just want to say, yeah, wow, you're like so much better. You want to say, okay, here are the areas in your consonant production, your vowel production, your suprasegmental production that are still problematic or are still potentially going to hinder you. So if you get more time to work on this, these are the areas in which you want to work. So to me, that's definitely your responsibility to do this kind of diagnostic testing and tell them at the end whether they've, improved or not. Because it's often very difficult it's often more difficult for students to make that assessment for their spoken discourse than it is for their written discourse, because often they don't really have the language in which to say it. They can't say, oh, it's my long vowels that are a problem, in the same way that they can say, oh, I'm struggling with, articles when I write or whatever. So you need to give them some of that language and some of the ways in which they can describe to you, you can describe to them then what they still need to work on. Okay. So talk to me a little bit, because that was about what diagnostics you've done with your students, anybody, or what diagnostics you've been allowed to do, or if you've never done one, or tell me a little bit about your individual context, because that will help the people that are going to listen to the recording as well, because some of those people might have similar circumstances to you.
I've never taught before, so I'm eager to hear what my peers have to say.
Ah, great, Caroline. Good. All right, good. Anne.
Well, I haven't taught either, so I don't have I don't have an experience in that field. But I'm just wondering, what comes first in terms of the initial diagnostics? Do you level them in some way so that you have like different kinds of texts that you have them read based on what your planned curriculum is for that year or that semester, or do you give them the same diagnostic and then group them into different levels?
So that's an excellent question, and I basically missed a step. Usually what happens if you're inside a school, private or public, they will have a leveling exam. So they will have an exam that they do. Sometimes it's a proficiency interview, an OPI, oral proficiency interview, or something where that's deliberately designed to level the students into certain classes. So once it, so you get everybody that is beginner, everybody who's intermediate, everybody who's advanced. So usually that is something that the school does either for you or with you, meaning it's their job to, you don't usually get an option as to what testing the school does in order to split up the levels. Okay, so this diagnostic testing is once they're split. So once you're working with your level is the mid-intermediate speaking and listening class, then you can start, working with those 10 students, 15 students, 20 students on these individual diagnostic passages. But for example, when I was teaching in the last place I taught, we used the Michigan. We used a old version of the Michigan test to test the students on their grammar and reading and writing, and then we did very short OPI interviews, and that was all done on the level of the school. So then they put them in their various levels, and then this would be once they're inside your classroom.
And then you would have different levels of text based on the level that they're in?
Well, yes. I mean, the school will have different levels of textbooks, advanced textbooks or intermediate or beginners. And that's where, that's often they don't have this kind of diagnostic work inside them though. So you will start doing, let's say you're using, there's a set of textbooks called Connections or something like that, where your school will say, here, you have the intermediate level textbook of Connections and go for it. Now, the textbook may or may not include individual diagnostic testing, but a lot of them don't. So then that's your job then to say what diagnostic, then you would do these kinds of testing to supplement your textbook with where you could see that there were problems. So what a lot of teachers do is just go through the textbook, which is fine if you've got plenty of time. But if you don't have plenty of time, once you've done an initial diagnostic, you can see what areas you might want to focus on more and focus on less, depending upon context and depending upon the results of your diagnostics. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So there's various levels of testing. Some of who's teaching in a different context, in like a school context at the moment, like a K through 12 or a Ari? Oh, yeah. Who was that?
Sarah L.
Sarah. Yes, go for it, Sarah.
So I'm not teaching ESL right now in my school because I'm in Pennsylvania and the laws on certification are really annoying to deal with. But I work very closely with the ESL department, and I know that we do the WIDA tests for when they first come in to place them, and we do the OPIs. And then once they're in the courses, what's kind of nice is that I'm at a cyber school, so everything the kids do ever is recorded and saved in our learning management system. Oh, so the teachers will we don't have a quote unquote scripted ESL curriculum yet. It's kind of developing over the years, and eventually we will have it. But the teachers basically will look back and say, here's where we saw whatever needed to be addressed in the class. Let's talk about it, do these exercises, yada, yada, yada. And then they'll do that same assignment again. So I don't know that it's necessarily exactly a diagnostic, but it's that same idea of, all right, here's this, let's talk about it. Now we're going to do that same thing again and look at where you've grown or where you still have room to grow.
Yeah,
So
and
that's
that's
kind of
great.
how we handle it.
Yeah, that's great. And it is, from that perspective, it's nice, Sarah, that you're not currently, or they're not currently trapped with a curriculum that they can't shift out of. A lot of people teaching in those pull-out classes or in ESL are sort of boxed in with a curriculum that they can't, change. So it's good. There's, with this individual diagnostic testing, it's also, the idea is that you can have more differentiated instruction. So let's say you have a pull-out cyber class of ESL kids and you've got, 2 Spanish and 3 Chinese or whatever, kids, you can use, I mean, obviously not this kind of diagnostic for young children, but you can use these kinds of diagnostics to then do more differentiated instruction inside the classroom. And this, again, this goes back to things I was saying before about your homework should be speaking homework. It shouldn't be writing homework. So you can have, so-and-so do a passage, this passage, and then somebody else do a different assignment or whatever. You still, can still do 4 or 5 minute, well, actually that's incredibly long, but like 2-minute assignments. And they can be slightly differentiated depending upon what the particular problem of the particular student is. And that's great. And for as long as your school district allows you to do that, yay. Because a lot of, as I say, a lot of teachers feel like they're incredibly boxed in. The other problem with K through 12 is often the exact opposite, which is if you have a pull-out class, let's say you're allowed to see these students, I don't know, 3 hours a week or something. They come into your classroom and then you're like, well, what am I supposed to do with them? You're supposed to be supporting their English development for classes, right? And what a lot of teachers end up doing is just simply helping them do their homework, because you don't really have a whole lot of time to do a whole lot else. And it's like, there's no curriculum. So it's like, oh, I don't really know what I'm supposed to be doing. So I think I'm just going to help them survive their school day. So that's another, if you've got that kind of environment, then that's another time where you can use diagnostic testing to maybe develop some more individualized activities, because now those activities are everywhere. Once you've done your diagnostic, then you go to manythings.org and you can find an exercise about it, anywhere you want, so that it can help with both those situations. The people that are really screwed are the people in the middle that have sort of a boxed in curricula that they're really not allowed to. And that is particularly bad if the boxed in curriculum really doesn't include speaking. Basically what their exam-based curriculum is all grammar and writing, then that can be a real problem. That used to be a real problem for adults because of TOEFL, but now with the new IBT TOEFL, specifically it was designed to move curriculum, EFL curriculum, away from just writing and grammar to having these speaking and listening components now, because now with the new IBT TOEFL, as most of you probably know, you have to do that component as well. Anyone else ready to talk to me?
Oh, I was just going to agree with, so I teach in the general education classroom, but I work with bilingual students. And so there's all types, like they're all at different levels. So like this year I have 2 that just came, they're brand new, like newcomers. They came like maybe a month ago. And then there's students that, they're born here and they went into, like from pre-K, they've been in school. So then, but that helps because there's not a set, like their curriculum is what their content, but then
Right.
when it's time to assess like where they are, that would be helpful for certain students that are intermediate or they're beginning or yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a place, like I say, I mean, I know that pull-out support is ESL support is supposed to be content support. I get that, and I get that the students need the content support, but you know, if there's time for you to do a little bit of individual assessment of some of their spoken language skill, then that's also sort of worth, you know, worth doing in a systematic way, rather than just saying, oh, I'm gonna have a crack at something to do with pronunciation today because I'm bored with everything else we're doing. But if you do some initial diagnostic testing, you can do that in a very systematic way, and you can actually that report that you create, your systematic report, can then be tracked. You know, you can either, like Sarah says, maybe you've got a learning management system that you can keep it on, but that report can go with the student so that people can see that there is or is not areas of development as they go through. So I think literally diagnostic testing is good for systematicity as much as anything else. Yeah. Good. And Ari, were you going to tell me something?
Well, I wish somebody had evaluated.
You're going to have to put your volume up. We can't hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I'm in California today. I'm using somebody else's computer. I don't know how this works very well.
Ah,
I'm so
okay.
sorry. So I don't know. I can't probably do it.
No, understood. Completely understood. No problem. We really can't hear you very well, so no problem at all. Okay then. So chapter 9, like I said, I'm really not going to do this. There is just a ton of stuff, techniques, tools, things that you can dip in and out of. The one that I used, the only one I was going to point out because it sounds weird and it looks weird, but it actually worked wonderfully for me, is the drama techniques that they have on 339 to 340. So, I mean, there are lots of different kinds of drama techniques, but they give you some examples on 339. 340. So, where am I? So this sort of looks like the kind of thing I was doing where I was doing Dory at the beginning, where it's sort of, yeah. But basically, one of the things that we know that is a problem is jaw movement. So in addition to having sort of a different ways of moving your jaw, often when you're a second language speaker, there's quite a lot of tension here too, because so you have a tendency to talk softly and maybe mumble a little bit. So what these drama techniques do is sort of force you to open your mouth and drop your jaw and give people more of a sense of how wide they can go, right? So these are literally techniques like, you know, making them go, whoa, for example, louder, longer, wider. And like I say, I know you have to present it with some confidence, but children love it. They're great. And actually adults, once they realize that it's to help their vowel production, they often have a good time. You know, if they're feeling comfortable and safe, they often have a good time with it. So I would urge you to do it. I like I say, I know for some people they think, oh God, I've never done a drama technique in my life, but actually they often, you often have a lot of fun. There's also lots of ideas for old-fashioned games. By old-fashioned, I mean board games. and also a lot of computer-based technology. So unless anyone had any specific questions about that chapter, I'm not going to take you through it anymore. Did anyone have any specific questions about that chapter? Not that you can think of right now. Okay. Okay, then in that case, let's talk about this is a short one this week because last week was a super long one. Let's talk about your reading post and your activity. So your reading post is similar to the one that we looked at before. This, Dr. Lynn Henriksen is a friend of mine, and he ran a course with a bunch of his grad students, and then they published in an online journal, T-Cell Reporter, which is Brigham Young, which is where he's at, Brigham Young University. They published this, and it's basically a review of 21 online pronunciation resources. Now, some of them we've done already. In there is included Accent Coach, speech, Iowa Speech Site, and several of these pronunciation.com, a few of the many things.org, but in total there's 21. So there's plenty for you to look at. So I'd like you to look at 3 of the resources you haven't looked at already. So don't do the same 3 that if you already looked at manythings.org, don't do that again. Have a look at the review. The review has been created by a graduate student / teacher like you. So then have a look at the resource and discuss whether or not you agree with the review and whether whether you would use that resource or not. So that's your reading post. And again, that's just to get you more familiar with more, as it seems to me that we think that we might be doing online stuff until online teaching until 2021. The end of 2021. So more and more it might be, you might be looking at online resources rather than face-to-face resources. Activity 3 is an interesting one, I think. So for activity 3, you're going to be working from a dialect archive. Now I'm going to try and do this and see if it comes up. So is this coming up as the idea archive? Okay, great. This is a great archive, by the way. It's International Dialects of English Archive. It's completely free. You can find out you can hear all kinds of learners doing all kinds of things. You can also listen to, so some of them are second language learners, speakers. Some of them are like British, or American or Australian. So it's great fun. It's fun for you and fun for your students. If they want to listen to a South African, for example, you can just come on here and search for one and find one. What you're going to do is do a pronunciation analysis, so a needs analysis for this learner of English. So I'm going to play a little bit for you and you can tell me if you can hear it.
This recording, Zacatecas 1, is copyright the International Dialects of English Archive. Karma Gets a Cure is copyright Douglas N. Honorath, Jill McCullough, and Barbara Somerville.
Well, here is a story for you. Sarah Perry was a veterinary nurse who had been working daily at an old zoo in a desert district of the territory. She was very happy to start a new job at a super private practice in North Square near the.
Okay, could you hear her? Yeah. So she's a speaker from Mexico, and she has some lovely consonant and vowel things going on. So you are going to listen to her. You just go to that I just did, and you'll find her thing. Then I have put a orthographic transcript, the PDF of the orthographic transcript of what she is reading. It's called Comma Gets a Cure, and that is in your materials. So you can compare that to her production if you're not sure what you're hearing her say. And what you're going to do is this assessment of her pronunciation problems in the areas that we've worked on so far. So that will be consonants, vowels, stress, and linking. So essentially you're going to do a little diagnostic on this chick in terms of where she is with her consonants, vowels, stress, and linking. So you can just, it doesn't have to be formatted in a certain way. You can just say, okay, consonants, here were the problems with the consonants, and here were the problems with the vowels, and what you listen to. Now it's a long tape, but what it's like for a spoken tape, it's nearly 5 minutes or something like that. But what you'll find is that if you listen to it, she has errors that she keeps coming back to all the time. So it's not all completely new errors. She has certain things that she'll keep. So for example, Comma Gets a Cure is about a goose, and she always mispronounces that ooh vowel and says something else, but she always says the same thing. So once you've got that down once, you've got that. So I'd like you to do that, and yeah, any discussion that you want to put in there about how you feel about how intelligible she is or anything else, that's fine. What you don't have to do is create an entire curriculum for her. At this point, you're just going to develop a model of her pronunciation, and then and identify what things you would work on. Now, I will say one thing. She's very flat. The one huge problem is that there is no intonation in her voice at all. So after you've listened to it for about 2 minutes, it sort of drives you slightly mad. And we will be, of course, looking at intonation in the second half. So, but for right now, yes, I understand that that's a big problem, but that's not, it actually, because she's so monotonic, it actually makes understanding the consonant and vowels errors a little bit easier. So yeah, you can say that, but that's, and I recognize that, but as we haven't covered that in class yet, you don't need to work on that. Okay, questions, comments? No, that all was pretty clear. All right, well, I am going to let you go early today because last week was long. So I will do what I usually do. If you've got any, if you're done, you're done. Thank you very much. If you've got any questions, just stay on, and I'll be staying on here until, till everybody's done. Okay, so thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
This is my husband.
Bye.
Oh, hello.
Bye.
Bye-bye.